It wasn't a cheating scandal. It wasn't a surprise breakup. It was worse. TLC, the same network that once gave Elizabeth and Andrei their own spin-off runway, has allegedly slammed the door behind them. For good. Not with a goodbye, not with a send-off, but with silence. And tucked inside that silence? Reports of $1 million lawsuit, a lifetime ban, and whispers of a potential arrest. No farewell confessionals, no dramatic final showdown. Just erased. This is OLIVA, and you're watching Reality Spot, the only place that doesn't blink when the story goes off script. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments, did you ever think it would come to this? Because the tea that's bubbled up behind the scenes is hotter than anything the cameras dare to show. For a couple that practically became a walking storyline, fighting, reconciling, shouting again, the sudden blackout was impossible to miss. One episode, they're center stage. The next, they're missing from promos. Future seasons? Quietly wiped clean. And just days after? Leaked insider reports say TLC's legal team finally pulled the trigger on what they'd allegedly been building for seasons. A full network shutdown of the Castrovet machine. This wasn't just a PR move. According to producers close to the situation, this was damage control. Allegedly, the tipping point wasn't one fight, one episode, or even one season. It was a slow build of chaos that finally crossed the line nobody could walk back from. The ban, insiders say, was permanent. Not temporary, not until they calmed down. Permanent. Publicly, nothing was said. Privately, contracts were voided. Meetings were canceled. Footage re-edited to erase them wherever possible. They weren't let go. They were buried. And while fans flooded forums asking why TLC would cut off such a high-conflict, high-engagement couple, the network held the line. Silent. Calculated. Executives, according to alleged leaks, believed that addressing it publicly would only expose how long they knew things were spiraling, while still cashing in. Better to scrub them out like they were never there than admit you profited from the risk until it became uncontainable. What if the drama we saw on screen was the sanitized version? Because allegedly, off-camera was a whole different story. Reports of fights that didn't make air. On-set disruptions. Crew members asking not to film with them. Entire production days lost to behavior that producers reportedly couldn't redirect. For every wild scene we watched at home, there was another version, rougher, messier, harder to spin into watchable content. And more than once, insiders say, those scenes ended with insurance calls and legal notes, not ratings boosts. This is where the story shifts. Because for years, Andrei and Elizabeth were the volatility that powered TLC's engagement machine. The couple you loved to hate. The toxic pairing that fans debated nonstop. Loud, unfiltered, confrontational. Think about it, they were the perfect puzzle piece for reality TV. Because they always reacted. Drama wasn't something that happened to them. They were the drama. Until one day, they weren't. They disappeared. And now that pieces of the truth are trickling out, it looks less like a spontaneous cancellation and more like a choreographed vanishing act. Only this time, TLC stripped them of the script. No words, no confessional closeout, just cut. What could push one of TLC's longest-running, most profitable couples to an allegedly permanent blacklist? You don't wake up one day and decide to ban a couple that helped build your brand. This wasn't one moment that exploded. It was years of tension, ignored warnings, and records. Yes, actual records. That finally caught up with TLC. While fans were watching screaming matches and awkward dinners, producers were allegedly filing internal reports, trying to hold the chaos together just long enough to squeeze out one more story arc. Elizabeth and Andrei weren't always a backstage headache, But according to insiders, by their third or fourth season, they weren't showing up for filming the way production expected. And when they did, it wasn't predictable conflict. It was off-script attitude, ignored directives, arguments once the camera stopped rolling. That sounds like reality TV gold until your crew starts asking not to work those scenes. Until your insurance company wants you to explain why the risk assessment on 2 cast members suddenly changed. Here's where the real story lives. Not in what made it to air, but in what had to be cut, blurred, or never shown at all. Sources linked to production say TLC amassed what they privately referred to as a liability file on the couple. It wasn't a few angry emails. This file allegedly included hotel security reports, travel shoot complaints, flagged footage marked never airable, and emails between legal and production discussing rising costs tied to Elizabeth and Andrei's presence on set. They weren't viewed as difficult talent. They were a known risk. But TLC didn't walk away. Why? Because Andrei and Elizabeth performed. The drama was loud, visible, messy, exactly what drives reality TV ratings. So, for years, the network gambled. Producers hoped structure and tighter control would work. Executives calculated that engagement metrics, shocking moments, trending hashtags, hate watch debates outweighed the liability. Until, quietly, it didn't. Behind the scenes, reportedly, more than one shoot had to be paused. Production days wasted, contracts reviewed. And each incident went into that growing file. Every season, more paperwork. The couple returned to air again and again, but the file traveled with them. A growing record of issues that no one watching could see, unless you were on location. Unless you were backstage when everything went off the rails on day 3 of a 6-day schedule. This wasn't just about behavior. It was about money, risk, and the line TLC finally refused to cross. Imagine working with talent who not only defied direction, but allegedly sent crew into meetings with HR. Imagine building a set where the safety net wasn't a producer stepping in, it was legal quietly preparing for impact. TLC's decision wasn't made during a bad argument or one chaotic reunion episode. It reportedly came after legal teams stepped in, reviewed that archive of issues, and said the words no network wants to hear, "You're exposed." As in, legally. That's when everything changed. Producers stopped looking at Elizabeth and Andrei as content creators and started seeing them as contract breakers. At a certain point, no matter how viral your episodes go, if every scene comes with a 20% premium in insurance cost, or worse, potential exposure to injury or lawsuits, profitability collapses. And when your network flips the switch and views you not as a controversial couple, but as a financial threat, the cameras might still be running, but the clock's already out of time. When a network finally treats its cast as a legal liability, what does it mean for everyone else on the payroll? It started small, little moments that fans clocked as awkward, but forgivable. Andrei cutting people off mid-conversation. Elizabeth rolling her eyes, then brushing it off in confessionals. Family scenes filled with static. But somewhere between season 5 and what would quietly become their final stretch, the vibe shifted from theatrical tension to something heavier, more defensive, more drained. On camera, they were burning out. Fast. Reunion episodes became battles. Simple questions would send Andrei into rants. Elizabeth started dodging accountability with half jokes and side glances. Every scene felt like a matchup, not a marriage. And then there were the exits. The ones that started almost like a pattern. Confrontation, escalation, walk off, return with attitude. Fans called it dramatic. Producers allegedly called it exhausting. Behind the scenes, things were worse. According to multiple insiders, shoots with Elizabeth and Andrei weren't just emotionally tense, they were logistically unstable. One former crew member reportedly said working their days felt like filming next to a fuse. Even when everything looked calm, people were holding their breath. Because the tension in that marriage didn't settle once the director said cut. If anything, that's when it intensified. Maybe the biggest red flag? The footage that didn't air. Insiders claim there were several scenes that were filmed, edited, then pulled last minute, not because of spoilers or timing, but because the tone veered into legally gray territory. Moments that allegedly exposed high conflict aggression meant for behind closed doors. Moments where producer intervention came dangerously close to being caught on mic. And reportedly, those weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern. Elizabeth's role wasn't passive either. While TLC often framed her as the calmer half, multiple sources say she routinely defended Andrei to the cast and the crew, even when things were spiraling. Not just support, but pushback. One insider said if producers asked Andrei to tone it down, Elizabeth would argue they were overreacting, that it was cultural, that this is just how he is. But over time, that defense stopped working. Because, yes, television loves a villain, but only when it's safe to invite the villain back next week. According to internal talk from production, Elizabeth's resistance reportedly began to be seen as part of the problem. If there was an incident and she refused to de-escalate, or worse, tried to explain it away, it made resolution impossible. And for a while, TLC tolerated it. After all, messy couples built the house. But by the final season, Elizabeth and Andrei weren't delivering storylines. They were delivering shutdowns. Entire filming days lost. Emotional whiplash for castmates. Crew allegedly requesting to never be scheduled on their scenes. There were union reports, HR mediation, and what one staffer called a soft blacklist, not from the network, but from the people on the ground who simply didn't want to deal with it anymore. And fans? They started to pick up the edge too. In one infamous tell-all, Andrei deflected every criticism with volume. Elizabeth backed him up, then contradicted herself an episode later. Their answers didn't match their behavior. Moments that should have been resolved turned into loops. Confrontation. Denial. Attack. Exit. Repeat. Viewers began asking, why does every interaction with this couple leave other cast members visibly emotionally drained? No storyline lasts forever, and by their final season, even loyal followers sensed a curtain call coming. But what TLC didn't expect, what nobody expected, was that the flashpoint wouldn't be between Andrei and Elizabeth at all. It would come from a side angle. A crack not in their marriage, but in a friendship. The real explosion didn't come from the marriage, it came from a friendship. Lauren and Elizabeth, two women who met through the franchise, hit it off fast, leaned on each other when the glare of filming started burning too bright. For a while, fans loved seeing them together. They weren't just married to strong personalities, they were the calm centers, or so we thought. But reunion episodes hinted at shift. Slight cold shoulders, little tension beats, nothing major, until episode 23. A segment that was supposed to be a reconciliation became something drastically different. Elizabeth, in front of cameras and cast, accused Lauren's husband, Alex, of verbal abuse. Not from rumors, not speculation. She said she saw it firsthand. That she'd been holding on to it for too long because she cared about her friend. The room froze. For a show built on awkward truth-telling, this wasn't fireworks. It was a stun grenade. Lauren shut down instantly. Didn't argue the facts. Didn't defend Alex. She asked why her friend would air this, like this, on camera. Elizabeth said it wasn't to attack, she wanted to protect. But depending on whose version you believe, everything about this moment was either betrayal or bravery. Producers allegedly considered cutting the sequence entirely. Legal reportedly reviewed it frame by frame. Was it a personal opinion? A serious claim presented without investigation? Or a breakup of a friendship wrapped in unresolved pain? For the network, it was yet another risk stacked on top of the existing tower. Because it's one thing if your lead couple is disruptive. It's another when they start bleeding conflict into other people's households. The moment Elizabeth called out Alex, intentional or not, she checked a box the network had tried hard not to check. Abuse language. No legal charges. No formal complaints. But the word was said. Publicly. On record. And cast reaction wasn't subtle. Some pulled back. Others voiced concern privately. After the scene aired, insiders say there was an immediate effect, live appearances dropped, comment moderation spiked, spin-off discussions halted. The vibe shifted from what will the Castrovettes do next to how much longer can the network carry this weight. Nobody officially commented. But the phone lines between TLC departments were allegedly lit up. What do you do when your most visible cast becomes your biggest unknown? But nothing, and no one, prepared TLC for what Elizabeth did next. It was supposed to be a bridge, one of those emotionally awkward post-season sit-downs where broken friendships get a neat little wrap-up courtesy of soft lighting and producer-led questions. Elizabeth and Lauren, two friends who had once seemed like the calm anchors in chaotic marriages, finally agreed to meet face-to-face after a rough stretch behind the scenes. Cameras rolled. Everyone braced for heaviness. But even reality veterans weren't ready for what came next. Elizabeth didn't start with shade. She opened with confusion, regret. Moments about feeling brushed aside. Typical tension. Navigable. Then, her tone shifted, like she'd taken one breath too long before saying the thing she'd clearly been carrying for months. She accused Lauren's husband, Alex, of being verbally abusive, not in vague terms, not as a what-if or fan theory. Elizabeth said, on camera, that she had seen firsthand how Alex allegedly spoke to Lauren. Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't guessing. In her words, it wasn't a rumor. It was real. Silence. Production sources later described the atmosphere in that room as instantly frozen because this wasn't normal 90-day conflict. This wasn't about cultural clashes or wedding drama. Elizabeth wasn't complaining about someone interrupting dinner. She said abuse. Quietly. Firmly. And with the entire cast and crew within earshot. Why didn't TLC cut this moment out? According to insiders, they almost did. Legal reviewed the footage almost immediately, and while the network understood the seriousness of the claim, they reportedly made the decision to air it as Elizabeth's opinion, not presented as verified fact. The segment stayed, but producers framed it with careful editing, shaping it not as truth, but as Elizabeth's perspective. Still, once that word was out, the damage couldn't be rolled back. Lauren didn't yell. She didn't start defending herself or Alex. She denied nothing. But her focus narrowed on one brutal question. Why didn't you say this in private? Her expression didn't betray panic. It showed heartbreak. Betrayal. A friend saying something so heavy, not in a text, not over a call, but in front of every viewer watching. Elizabeth tried to backtrack emotionally, saying it came from a place of love and concern. But the gap between intention and impact was already too wide. Even if Elizabeth meant to protect Lauren, what fans and cast saw looked a lot more like a public trial, and Lauren hadn't been given a heads up before the hearing. The second Elizabeth spoke, the story stopped being only about her marriage. Reactions rolled in fast. Some fans defended Elizabeth, praising her courage. In their view, she had seen patterns she could no longer stay silent about. Others weren't so sure. Forums, comments, podcasts, questions took over. Was this her place? Was this the right moment? Did she want to help? Or was this retaliation in disguise? The rawness of Lauren's reaction didn't help settle things. If Elizabeth was trying to be protective, was there a better way? Supporters pointed to Elizabeth's history with Andrei. Maybe she'd seen warning signs early. Maybe she was projecting, or maybe she knew too well what it looked like when love turns loud and toxic behind closed doors. Critics weren't buying it. Many called it performative, even cruel. Some speculated that Elizabeth's own tension with Lauren had built up and morphed into this. If the friendship was already shattering, was this Elizabeth's way of reclaiming power publicly? Alex, notably, said absolutely nothing, on screen or off. According to sources, that silence wasn't an oversight. It was legal advice. By ignoring the accusation entirely, Alex avoided giving it more oxygen. And yet, that same silence created space for speculation. Fans began dissecting every past scene he was in. Every comment he'd ever made during confessionals, rewound and watched in a different tone. His marriage, once seen as emotionally quiet compared to others on the show, now came under a microscope. And even though no charges were filed, no legal fallout followed, the damage was already done. Not criminal. Not actionable. But relational disorder set in immediately. Friends chose sides. Some backed away quietly, worried they'd be forced to comment either way. Others reposted cryptic statements about trust, loyalty, and betrayal that fans immediately linked to the incident. Behind the scenes, insiders say the fallout affected more than just personal dynamics. TLC reportedly hit pause on upcoming plans involving both couples. The show's legal team reportedly escalated production protocols to avoid a repeat, stricter moderation, legal review of airing sensitive content, and greater executive oversight whenever real-world accusations emerged on tape. And Elizabeth? Her brand took a hit. Not because she spoke, but because she spoke in a way the audience didn't know how to receive. Some viewers saw bravery. Others saw a friend causing reputational damage in front of a national audience with no warning and no restraint. The one person she said she was trying to help left that set looking anything but protected. Was she calling out abuse? Or was this something else entirely? Maybe it was concern. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was control, masked as care. Either way, the weight of her words didn't land in a vacuum. They cracked a fragile friendship and shifted the public image of 3 cast members who until this moment had avoided the show's darkest storms. After the episode aired, TLC didn't post a tweet. No cast apology, no official response, just silence, and then vanishing. Andrei and Elizabeth disappeared from upcoming promos. Planned appearances were quietly canceled. A rumored spin-off? Scrapped. Even unfinished segments for the rest of the season were allegedly recut to minimize their screen time. No reunion sit-down, no final confessional. And that wasn't a fluke. It was strategy. Inside the network, sources say alarms had been ringing for a while. But after Elizabeth's on-camera accusation against Alex, those alarms turned into meetings. Legal meetings. Executive meetings. Discussions not about storyline potential, but about whether it was even possible to justify keeping them on screen. The word liability came up more than once. Producers reportedly reviewed not just the episode, but the conversation leading up to it, the decision to air it, and the traction it gained once it went viral on fan forums. Had they let it go too far? Had they misjudged how the audience would react? Or, more dangerously, had they crossed a line of their own by airing something that could now be seen as reputational damage without due diligence? Internally, sources say trust crumbled. There was a time when Elizabeth and Andrei were considered a valuable asset. Volatile, sure, but compelling. By season 6, that shifted. They weren't content to react to drama. They were creating drama that couldn't be managed. What the network once thought of as good chaos started turning into actual risk. The couple no longer responded to producer notes. They contradicted themselves in interviews. They walked off mid-filming with increasing frequency. And crew? Some reportedly refused to be assigned to their scenes at all. If that wasn't enough reason to pull back, insiders claim the spillover effect sealed it. After the accusation against Alex, producers weren't just dealing with one cast member and their story anymore. They were now managing the emotional and reputational fallout of other cast members, people they still wanted to work with, people who were, to be blunt, easier to manage and safer to feature long term. What started as a messy cast dynamic now looked like a career blacklisting in slow motion. From the inside out, the damage spread. According to industry whispers, TLC viewed Andrei and Elizabeth as a unified presence, meaning the issues weren't going to stop by removing one of them. If Elizabeth caused friction, Andrei escalated it. If producers tried to isolate scenes or shoot with them separately, it only made things worse. Eventually, the decision became simple. You cut both, or you solve nothing. Friends in the franchise felt the ripple too. Production insiders say there was a noticeable shift in how other cast members interacted with them. Less engagement, fewer public congratulations, quiet backing off. Because here's the thing networks rarely admit in public. Once you're flagged internally, it gets around. Doors begin to close. Even if no press release is sent out, those behind the scenes know what's happening. Some casts reportedly became nervous about being too visible in scenes with Elizabeth and Andrei for fear it might drag them into controversy. Others allegedly lobbied producers not to schedule them in reunion conversations next to the couple. Whether it was out of safety, optics, or emotional exhaustion depends on who you ask. But the response was consistent. Distance. And that included fans. Comment sections once filled with fire emojis and messy love-hate now took a darker tone. Viewers weren't calling this entertaining anymore. They were uncomfortable. Reviews shifted from "bring them back" to "why is this still airing?" Of course, not everyone turned on them. Some fans argued that Elizabeth did the right thing, that protecting a friend and saying uncomfortable truths out loud shouldn't come with this kind of consequence. They pointed to TLC's long history of rewarding toxicity unless it hurts the brand, that this couple wasn't any worse than others, that the network used them for chaos and dropped them the second it became inconvenient. And there's a point there. TLC has aired worse. We've all seen it. But insiders say this wasn't about worse. It was about risk. When cast starts overriding producers, causing walkouts, and making statements that trigger legal oversight, that's no longer just drama. That's exposure. And Elizabeth and Andrei stopped being a calculated risk the moment they couldn't be contained on set. Some production members admit, off record, they felt the couple got too far. That earlier intervention may have helped. But others say the behavior had roots too deep to extract. By the last 2 seasons, there was no more changing course. Trust had eroded. Control was gone. And just when fans thought it couldn't get worse, the arrest rumors began to circulate. The arrest rumors came quickly. Faster than any official quote, faster than any verified headline. Whispers that Andrei could be taken in at any moment. Some claimed he crossed the line on set. Others said it had nothing to do with filming at all. But when viewers went searching for records, court cases, warrants, there was nothing solid. No current charges. No confirmed legal action. Just silence. Again. And this time, unease. Insiders later clarified there was no active arrest order. But what changed was the cushion. TLC wasn't going to shield anyone anymore. Not from producers. Not from legal departments. And definitely not from law enforcement. If another incident happened, and it fit that same behavioral pattern, the network would no longer buffer it behind the scenes. They would walk away and let the consequences land. Which, when you think about it, says everything. Reality TV relies on personality. The bigger, louder, bolder, the better. But what happens when the line between conflict and crisis starts to blur, and it's happening in real time, on your premiere time slot? The answer, in TLC's case, was quiet erasure. Cut ties, bury contracts, and let the silence do the rest. Andrei and Elizabeth didn't deny it. they didn't confirm it either. For a while, both accounts stayed unusually locked down. Comments filtered, captions vague, no statements to clear anything up. Just passive visibility, travel photos, old family shots, low engagement story reposts that told fans nothing about what came next. Privately, sources say they tried to pivot. Other networks, streaming platforms, side ventures, anything to distance themselves from the 90-day branding while still using the built-in recognition that it gave them. But word travels faster behind the scenes than it does in press releases. Multiple outlets reportedly passed when they caught wind of TLC's internal decision. No brand wants to inherit unresolved mess. Even inside the cast, they weren't followed like they used to be. Some co-stars quietly unfollowed. A few stayed silent despite previously tagging them in every promo. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The disconnect was visible anyway. Producers, meanwhile, were making moves too. After Elizabeth's in-air accusation and everything that followed, legal teams reportedly worked with producers to update the franchise's internal policies. Stricter conduct clauses. Language that gave the crew more room to speak up if shoots got heated. Earlier escalation to legal teams. Not every cast fight is a fire, but the ones that are? They won't be ignored anymore. Everything about it goes back to what this franchise used to reward. Chaos. Ratings through dysfunction. Profits through arguments. You could go on national TV, scream at your spouse, make it a meme, and score your own spin-off 6 months later. But after this, something in that formula cracked. When fans no longer recognize what's safe, what's real, and what's responsibility versus TV, the network has to recalibrate. Because the audience stays watching, but also starts questioning. And Elizabeth and Andrei's arc didn't end with a breakup or a redemption. It just stopped being useful to the network. Producers lost control of the couple's narrative. Then they lost the couple. And what's wild is, it wasn't even their relationship that took them down. It was a friendship. An accusation. A single moment of what did she just say? That detonated a larger concern. How long did everyone see this coming and let it play out anyway? It forced the show to look in the mirror, because once concern becomes content and harm becomes episode structure, where's the line? Ratings survived for years off of this couple. But eventually, the chaos started costing money. Last-minute re-edits, paused productions, unusable clips, insurance increases, burned-out crews. TLC used to cast chaos for views. Now chaos costs money. This wasn't about someone being too real for reality TV. It was about someone becoming more damaging than valuable. And once that balance tips, the silence sets in. Elizabeth and Andrei learned the hard way that the show must go on, but not always with you in it. That fallout between Lauren and Elizabeth, it may have ended more than just a relationship. Some say it ended their careers. We'll cover how TLC's casting strategy has changed since in the next reality sport episode.